Some objects seem to carry more than just their own weight. They carry stories, legends, and sometimes a terrifying history. The Hope Diamond is one of those objects. It's a legendary 45-carat blue diamond, one of the most famous jewels in the world. But its path through history is marked by an infamous curse, a trail of madness, suicide, and tragedy, said to follow anyone who dared to own it. The story begins in the 17th century, when a French merchant named Jean-Baptiste Tavernier brought the massive blue gem back from India. He sold it to King Louis XIV of France in 1668. The king had it recut into what became known as the French blue. While Louis XIV enjoyed a long reign, tragedy haunted his family, with his son and grandson both dying before him. But the curse really seemed to take hold with his descendants. The diamond was passed down to King Louis XVI and his wife, Marie Antoinette. They became the most famous victims of the curse when they were both executed by guillotine during the French Revolution. In the chaos of the revolution, the French blue was stolen and disappeared for decades. When a similar blue diamond reappeared in London in the early 1800s, it had been recut to disguise its origins. It was bought by a wealthy banker named Henry Philip Hope, which is how it got its modern name. But the Hope family didn't fare much better. The family fortune crumbled, and they were eventually forced to sell the diamond to pay off massive debts. It passed through the hands of several other owners who also met with financial ruin or personal tragedy. But the diamond's deadliest chapter came when it reached America. In 1912, it was bought by Evelyn Walsh McLean, a wealthy socialite who was fascinated by the curse and reportedly wore the diamond everywhere. She scoffed at the legend, but then her life fell apart in a series of unbelievable tragedies. Her 9-year-old son was killed in a car accident. Her husband had an affair, was declared legally insane, and died in a mental institution. Her daughter died of a drug overdose at just 25. By the end of her life, McLean had lost her husband, 2 of her children, and her entire fortune. After McLean's death, the diamond was bought by the jeweler Harry Winston. But instead of keeping it for himself, Winston did something no other owner had done. In 1958, he donated the Hope Diamond to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. And since then, the curse seems to have been broken. Today, it sits safely behind glass, a stunning piece of history that millions of people can admire, seemingly free of the dark legacy that followed it for centuries. But the Hope Diamond wasn't the only cursed gem to leave a trail of tragedy. In fact, another famous jewel has a history just as dark, if not stranger. It's known as the Black Orloff Diamond, a stunning 67-carat black diamond also called the Eye of Brahma. And that name is the key to its curse. The legend says the diamond was originally a massive 195-carat stone, and it was stolen from the eye of a statue of the Hindu god Brahma in a temple near Pondicherry, India. The theft supposedly angered the god, placing a deadly curse on anyone who would ever possess it. The diamond disappeared for many years, but when it resurfaced in the United States in the early 20th century, the curse seemed to strike with a horrifying pattern. In 1932, a diamond dealer named J.W. Paris brought the gem to America. Shortly after finalizing its sale, he jumped to his death from a skyscraper in New York City. The diamond was later acquired by a Russian princess named Nadia Weigen-Orloff. Just a few months later, in 1947, she also leapt from a building in Rome in an apparent suicide. The stone then passed to another princess, Leonila Galitzine-Bariatinski, who, not long after, followed the same terrifying fate, jumping to her death. It seemed that any woman who owned the jewel was doomed to die by a mysterious, fatal fall. A later owner, a jeweler named Charles F. Winson, decided to try and break the curse for good. He had the large diamond recut into 3 smaller pieces, hoping to shatter its dark power. And strangely, it seems to have worked. Since the diamond was divided, there have been no more mysterious deaths associated with it. The curse of the Black Orloff, it seems, was broken by a jeweller's saw. Of all the cursed jewels in the world, perhaps none has a legend as strange or as specific as the Koh-i-Noor. It's one of the largest cut diamonds on the planet, a stunning stone whose name translates to Mountain of Light. But its incredible beauty comes with a very particular warning, a legend that has been passed down for centuries. The legend says the diamond will bring immense fortune and power to any woman who wears it, but for any man who dares to own it, the stone brings only ruin, madness, and a violent death. And if you look at its history, the legend seems chillingly accurate. For centuries, the diamond was passed between male rulers in India, Persia, and Afghanistan, and almost every single one of them met a terrible end. They were overthrown, blinded, tortured, or assassinated, their empires crumbling around them as they held the famous stone. The curse, however, had a loophole. When the diamond eventually came into the possession of the British Empire in the mid-1800s, it was presented to Queen Victoria. And unlike the kings and emperors before her reign was long and incredibly prosperous. Since then, the warning has been taken very seriously. The Koh-i-Noor was placed in the British Crown Jewels, and by tradition, it is only ever worn by female members of the royal family. It seems some legends are just too powerful to ignore. But perhaps the most terrifying cursed gem isn't really a gem at all. And it's not a diamond. It's a large, violet-coloured amethyst, mistakenly called the Delhi Purple Sapphire. And its story is so dark, one of its owners tried to lock its curse away in a box forever. The stone story begins in 1857 during the Indian Mutiny. It was stolen from a sacred temple of Indra in Cawnpore, India, by a British soldier named Colonel W. Ferris. The soldier brought it back to England, but his good fortune soon turned sour. He lost all his money, and his entire family was hit by a string of mysterious illnesses. After he died, the stone passed to his son, who suffered the same run of bad luck. He gave it to a family friend, who, after getting the stone, unexpectedly took his own life. The amethyst eventually found its way to a writer and scientist named Edward Heron Allen in 1890. Shortly after, a wave of misfortune crashed over him. Convinced the stone was to blame, he gave it to a friend who was a singer. She promptly lost her voice and never sang again. Desperate, Heron Allen even threw the stone into a London canal, hoping to be rid of it forever. But in a bizarre twist, the stone was dredged up 3 months later and returned to him by a jeweller who recognized it. Defeated and terrified, Heron Allen decided he could never get rid of it, so he did the next best thing. He sealed the amethyst inside a series of 7 boxes and deposited it in his bank, with strict instructions that it should not be opened until 3 years after his death. With it, he left a chilling warning. It read in part, "This stone is trebly accursed and is stained with the blood and the dishonour of everyone who has ever owned it." He ended his note with a desperate plea to whoever might find it in the future, saying, "I do earnestly entreat you to cast it into the sea." But curses aren't always attached to jewels you can hold. Sometimes a warning is carved directly into stone, guarding the final resting place of one of history's most feared conquerors. This was the case for the tomb of Timur, the great 14th century Turco-Mongol leader also known as Tamerlane, a man whose brutal campaigns left a legacy of terror across Asia. When Timur was buried in his grand mausoleum in Samarkand, Uzbekistan, a chilling inscription was placed upon his tomb. It was a direct warning to anyone who might dare to disturb his eternal sleep, and it read, "Whosoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." For centuries, his tomb remained sealed and his warning was respected. But in June of 1941, a team of Soviet anthropologists with the permission of Joseph Stalin himself, arrived to open the casket. They wanted to study Timur's remains and reconstruct his facial features. Despite pleas from local elders who feared the ancient curse, the scientists went ahead. On June 20th, 1941, they broke the seal and opened Timur's sarcophagus. 2 days later, the prophecy was fulfilled with terrifying accuracy. On June 22, 1941, Adolf Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa. Millions of Nazi soldiers poured across the border in a surprise attack, beginning the invasion of the Soviet Union. It was the largest and deadliest land invasion in the history of warfare, an onslaught of destruction and death that dwarfed even the brutal campaigns of Timur himself. The strange coincidence was so unsettling that Stalin eventually ordered Timur's remains to be reburied with full Islamic rites in late 1942, just before the Soviets finally began to turn the tide of the war. Sometimes a curse isn't written on a tomb, but carried within the body itself. In 1991, 2 German hikers, Helmut and Erika Simon, were trekking through the Ötztal Alps when they discovered a human body emerging from a melting glacier. They assumed it was an unlucky modern mountaineer. They were wrong. The body was 5,300 years old, a perfectly preserved man from the Copper Age who came to be known as Ötzi the Iceman. It was one of the most important archaeological discoveries of the century. But as Ötzi gave scientists an incredible glimpse into the past, a dark and deadly pattern began to take shape. It was whispered that a curse came with him. The first to fall was Rainer Henn, the forensic expert who placed Ötzi's bare remains into a body bag. Just a year after the discovery, he died in a car accident while on his way to deliver a speech about the Iceman. Shortly after, Kurt Fritz, the mountain guide who led Henn to the body, was killed in an avalanche. He was the only person in his climbing group to be hit. The eerie deaths continued. A journalist who filmed the body's recovery died of a brain tumor. Then, in 2004, a terrible irony struck. Helmut Simon, one of the original hikers who found Ötzi, fell to his death during a blizzard in the very same mountain range. The man who led the search party for Simon's body, Dieter Warnecke, suffered a fatal heart attack less than an hour after Simon's funeral. By the time the leading scientist on the case, Konrad Spindler, died from complications of multiple sclerosis, he was famously quoted as saying, "I think it's a load of rubbish. It is all a media hype." The next thing you'll be saying is, "I'll be next." He became the 6th person in the string of deaths. The unofficial 7th was an archaeologist who analysed Ötzi's DNA. He died of a blood-related illness before his book on the Iceman was even published. Like the Iceman, some of the greatest archaeological finds seem to bring a shadow of misfortune with them. In March of 1974, a group of 7 farmers were digging a well in China's Shanxi province when their shovels hit something hard. It wasn't a rock. It was the head of a life-sized clay soldier. They had stumbled upon the now famous terracotta army, the silent protectors of China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. It was a discovery that would stun the world and become a national treasure. But for the men who found it, it was the beginning of a strange and tragic curse. Soon after the discovery, the government claimed their farmland and demolished their homes to build the museum that stands there today. For unearthing one of history's greatest wonders, the farmers were left landless and in poverty. The man who made the first discovery, Yang Jifa, ended up working in the museum gift shop, signing autographs for tourists for a meager wage. His fellow farmers fared even worse. One of them, plagued by the sudden turn his life had taken, hanged himself. 2 others died in their 50s, too broke to afford medical care. The incredible find didn't bring them fame or fortune. It brought them ruin. The curse it seems, wasn't one of ancient spirits, but of a very modern kind of heartbreak. Curses don't always have to be ancient. Sometimes they are a very modern phenomenon. In the heart of the Australian outback stands Uluru, a colossal sandstone monolith that glows a deep fiery red at sunset. For the local Anangu people, it is a profoundly sacred place, the centre of their spiritual world. And there is one important rule all visitors are told: do not take anything from this land, especially not the rocks. But for decades, tourists have ignored this warning, slipping small pieces of the ancient rock into their pockets as souvenirs. And that's when a truly strange pattern began to emerge. Mail started arriving at the Uluru Kata Chuta National Park office. Packages of all sizes from all over the world. Inside each one was a stolen rock. And attached was a letter of apology. The stories were eerily similar. People wrote of sudden illness, financial ruin, car crashes, broken marriages, and just an endless streak of crippling bad luck, and that only started after they brought the rock home. The park has since collected thousands of these sorry rocks, along with a massive file of apology letters from guilt-ridden tourists desperate to undo their mistake. It's a modern curse with a unique remedy: mail the bad luck back to where it came from. Every year, hundreds of people do exactly that, hoping to free themselves from the curse of the sacred stone. But a curse doesn't always come from a famous jewel or a sacred rock. Sometimes the most dangerous object is something small and unassuming. This is the strange case of the woman from Lem, a small limestone statue carved around 3500 BC in Cyprus. It's barely big enough to sit in your hand, but it has earned a terrifying nickname: the goddess of death. The statue's modern history begins in the late 19th century with its first owner, Lord Elfont. He acquired the figurine, and within just 6 years, all 7 members of his family were dead from sudden, unexplained causes. The statue then passed to a man named Ivor Minucci. His family met the exact same fate. After him, a Lord Thompson Knoll bought the artefact. He and his entire family were also wiped out within 4 years. The last private owner was Sir Alan Biverbrook. He, his wife, and their 2 daughters all died, leaving only his 2 sons. Terrified, the surviving brothers decided they had to get rid of the statue. They donated it to the Royal Scottish Museum in Edinburgh. Today, the woman from Lem sits alone, sealed inside a glass case, and to this day, museum staff are under strict orders not to touch it. Not all cursed objects are ancient treasures. Some are modern and look completely harmless. In 1970, a nursing student named Donna received a Raggedy Ann doll from her mother for her birthday. It was a cheerful, ordinary-looking toy that she placed on her bed as a decoration. But it didn't stay ordinary for long. At first, the activity was subtle. Donna and her roommate, Angie, would come home to their apartment and find the doll had moved. They would leave it sitting on Donna's bed, only to find it on the couch in the living room. The movements became more noticeable over time, with the doll changing positions, crossing its legs or arms, or even appearing to stand on its own 2 feet. Then, things took a much stranger turn. The women started finding small pieces of parchment paper in the apartment with handwritten messages on them. In what looked like a child's scrawl, the notes said things like, "Help us." What was so strange was that Donna and Angie didn't even own any parchment paper. It seemed the notes were coming from the doll itself. Unnerved, the roommates contacted a medium. She told them that the doll was inhabited by the spirit of a 7-year-old girl named Annabelle Higgins, who had died on the property years ago. The spirit told the medium she felt safe with the girls and wanted to stay with them by possessing the doll. Feeling sorry for the lonely child's spirit, Donna and Angie gave it permission, and that's when the real terror began. Their friend Lou, who always hated the doll, was attacked by an unseen force that left deep, bloody scratches across his chest. Convinced they had made a terrible mistake, the nurses contacted the famed paranormal investigators, Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens quickly determined that the doll was not possessed by a child, but by an inhuman, demonic entity that had tricked them. They took the doll with them, and today it sits inside a specially constructed glass case in the Warrens Occult Museum in Connecticut, bearing a sign that warns, positively, do not open. If the Annabelle doll hides its menace behind a friendly face, another haunted toy makes no such pretense. In Key West, Florida, lives Robert the doll, a 3-foot-tall figure stuffed with straw, dressed in a sailor suit and clutching a small stuffed lion. His glass-bead eyes stare blankly, and his face is scarred with age and something more sinister. The story starts in 1904, when the doll was given to a young boy named Robert Eugene Gene Otto. Gene adored the doll, naming it Robert and taking it everywhere. But soon, strange things began to happen. Gene's parents would hear their son having conversations in his room with the doll, and would be horrified to hear a second, lower voice responding. When toys were found broken or furniture was overturned, Gene would always have the same terrified excuse. Robert did it. Neighbours even reported seeing the doll moving from window to window when the family wasn't home. Gene kept Robert his whole life. After he died, the doll was left in the attic until a new family moved in. They too reported hearing disembodied giggling and footsteps, and their young daughter claimed Robert was alive and tried to attack her. Today, Robert the doll is housed in the Fort East Martello Museum, where his curse has taken on a modern form. Visitors are warned that they must ask Robert's permission before taking his photograph. Those who mock the rule or forget to ask are said to be cursed with terrible luck, from car accidents to broken bones and lost jobs. The proof is pinned to the walls all around his glass case. Hundreds of letters from terrified tourists, apologizing to the doll and begging him to lift the curse. Sometimes a curse isn't tied to a doll or a toy, but to a simple piece of furniture. In a quiet pub in North Yorkshire, England, there is an old oak chair with a dark and deadly reputation. It's known as the Chair of Death, or, more famously, Busby's Stoop. The legend begins in 1702 with a local criminal named Thomas Busby. After murdering his father-in-law, Busby was sentenced to hang. On his way to the gallows, he was granted one last drink at his favourite pub. As he was finally led away to meet his fate, he stood up, looked at his empty chair, and shouted a curse. "May sudden death come to anyone who dares sit in my chair." For a while, it was just a local ghost story. But then, the curse began to claim its victims. During World War II, airmen from a nearby base would dare each other to sit in the chair. Eerily, it's said that none of the men who took the dare ever returned from their missions. The deadly pattern continued for decades. A roofer sat in it and fell through a roof to his death the next day. A delivery man took a seat for a moment and died in a car crash just hours later. Finally, in the late 1970s, the pub's landlord had had enough. Convinced the chair was truly cursed, he decided to stop the string of deaths for good. He took the chair and hung it high from the ceiling, where it remains to this day, well out of reach of anyone foolish enough to test Busby's final, chilling words. But perhaps the most unsettling cursed object is one that doesn't just bring bad luck, but holds a piece of a tragedy within its glass. At the Myrtles Plantation in Louisiana, one of America's most haunted homes, there is an antique mirror in the grand foyer. And according to legend, it never reflects an empty room. The story is tied to a woman named Sarah Woodruff and her 2 children. According to the plantation's law, they were poisoned. Local custom at the time dictated that all mirrors in a house should be covered after a death to prevent the spirits of the deceased from being trapped inside. But in the chaos and grief of that day, this one mirror was supposedly forgotten. Ever since, visitors and staff have reported seeing things in its cloudy surface. They claim to see the ghostly figures of a woman and her children looking back at them. But the most chilling evidence is the handprints. Small, child-sized handprints frequently appear on the glass. No matter how many times the mirror is wiped clean, the eerie marks always return, a permanent stain left by spirits trapped behind the silver. The legend of the Bassano vase begins with a wedding that never happened. It was a beautiful silver vase, crafted in the 15th century as a gift for a young Italian bride. But on the night of her wedding, she was found murdered, her hands still clutching the vase. As she died, a dark legend was born. The vase would bring swift death to any who dared to own it. For centuries, the object was passed down and hidden away by the bride's family, who feared its dark power. But eventually, the vase resurfaced and began to claim its victims with terrifying speed. It was sold to a pharmacist, who died mysteriously just 3 months later. From there, it was passed to a surgeon, who owned it for only 2 months before he too was found dead. The vase then fell into the hands of an archaeologist who was fascinated by its history. He died just a few months after acquiring it. After the archaeologist's death, there was no doubt. The horrifying pattern was too consistent to ignore. The family of the last victim refused to sell it or pass it on, determined to stop the string of deaths for good. Instead, they had the vase secretly buried in an undisclosed location. The Bassano vase has never been seen since, its curse finally put to rest by being locked away in the earth. While some cursed objects are buried to end their story, others find a whole new life on the internet. In 1972, an artist named Bill Stoneham painted a surreal and unsettling picture based on a photograph of himself as a child. He called it "The Hands Resist Him." It shows a young boy standing beside a creepy life-size doll with vacant black eye sockets. Behind them is a glass door, and pressed against the pane from the other side are dozens of small disembodied hands. For years, the painting's strange history was quiet. But in the year 2000, it appeared in a listing on eBay. The anonymous sellers, a couple from California, had found it abandoned behind an old brewery. They posted a desperate warning along with the sale. They claimed that their young daughter, soon after they brought the painting home, insisted that the children in the picture were fighting at night. She said they would sometimes come out of the painting and into her room. Terrified, the parents set up a motion-activated camera in the room where the painting was hung. They claimed it captured images of the boy figure actually climbing out of the frame. Desperate to get rid of it, they listed it online, detailing their entire story and including a disclaimer absolving them of responsibility for whatever happened to the next owner. The listing went viral. But that's when the story took an even stranger turn. People from all over the world who simply viewed the pictures in the eBay listing began reporting bizarre and frightening experiences. Some felt a sudden, intense sickness. Others heard voices or felt an unseen presence in the room with them. The curse wasn't just for the owners anymore, it had gone digital. The painting eventually sold for just over $1,000 to a gallery in Michigan, solidifying its reputation as one of the internet's most haunted objects. If The Hands Resist Him became famous for its digital curse, another infamous painting is said to be haunted in a much more direct and bloody way. It's known as The Anguished Man, a portrait of a screaming face painted in deep reds and dark swirls. Its terrifying story begins with its creation. According to the legend, the painting was made by an unknown artist who was deeply tormented. He mixed his own blood into the oil paints to create the work's horrifying colours. Shortly after finishing his masterpiece, he took his own life. The painting was eventually passed down to a man named Sean Robinson, who inherited it from his grandmother. She'd kept it locked away in her attic for years, warning him that the painting was evil. Robinson, skeptical at first, took it home. But soon, strange things began to happen. He and his family reported hearing disembodied crying and scratching noises coming from the room where the painting was hung. They witnessed doors slamming shut on their own and a strange mist rising from the canvas. Most disturbingly, they claimed to see a tall, shadowy figure standing in their home, watching them. Robinson has since documented many of these events on video, trying to capture proof that the artist's tortured spirit is forever trapped within the canvas. Sometimes, a curse doesn't just create a legend, it inspires one. The story begins in 1785, when a farmer was ploughing a field near Silchester, the site of an old Roman town in England. He unearthed a large, heavy gold ring. The ring was strange. It was unusually large, with 10 facets and an image of a goddess etched into it. It also had a Latin inscription, but for over a century it was little more than a curious artifact, its true story completely unknown. Then, nearly 40 years later and 100 miles away, archaeologists were excavating a different Roman site. At the ruins of a temple dedicated to a Celtic god named Nodens, they found a lead tablet known as a defixio, which is a Roman curse tablet. The inscription told a fascinating story. It was a plea from a Roman named Silvianus. He complained that a man named Senecianus had stolen his gold ring while he was at the temple. The tablet asks the god Nodens to place a curse on anyone named Senecianus, saying that none of them should be granted health until the stolen ring is returned to the temple. For a long time, these were just 2 separate Roman artifacts. But in 1929, an archaeologist named Sir Mortimer Wheeler put the pieces together. He realized the stolen ring mentioned on the curse tablet and the gold ring found by the farmer were one and the same. To better understand the history of the god Nodens, Wheeler called on a brilliant professor of Anglo-Saxon at Oxford University for help. That professor's name was J.R.R. Tolkien. Tolkien worked on the site and became intimately familiar with the story of a golden ring that was stolen and carried a powerful curse that affected its wearer. The parallels are incredible. A magical ring of power, an inscription, and a curse that corrupts its bearer. Historians now widely believe that this real-life artifact, the Ring of Silvianus, was the direct inspiration for one of the most famous cursed objects in all of fiction, the One Ring from The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And in the end, that might be the strangest curse of all, not one that takes a life, but one that creates a story so powerful it escapes the real world and enters our collective imagination. The curse of Silvianus's ring didn't end with a trail of bodies. It ended with J.R.R. Tolkien, where a real Roman artifact was reforged into one of fiction's most terrifying objects, the One Ring. But for every curse that inspires a story, this episode has been filled with stories that seem to write their own grim reality. From the string of suicides that followed the Black Orloff diamond, to the series of fatal accidents surrounding Otzi the Iceman, to the modern-day letters of apology sent back with the sacred rocks of Uluru. The pattern is eerily the same. An object, whether a priceless jewel, an ancient statue, or a child's simple doll, passes from one owner to the next. In its wake, a trail of ruin, madness, or death follows so closely it seems to defy all chance. So are these objects truly imbued with malevolent forces? Or are they just magnets for tragedy, their dark reputations built on a foundation of unbelievable coincidence and human fear? Perhaps the source of the curse almost doesn't matter. The moment we believe the story, the moment we whisper that an object is haunted, or that a warning is real, we give it a power all its own. An idea that can travel for centuries, staining a diamond, a painting, or a simple chair with a legacy that feels terrifyingly real. Maybe the true curse was never in the objects at all, but in the stories we tell about them. and the unsettling fear that some tragedies are too perfect to be just a coincidence.